I'm so sick of all this. Finally, I'm alone. The Superman is the sail of the sea, and everything else is weight and ballast. He must be lighter and more agile. Friedrich Nietzsche. The concept of the superhuman was first considered in detail in the works of the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. In his opinion, a superhuman is a person who has overcome the narrow limits of morality and traditional values, living by his own principles and striving for self-improvement. Nietzsche considered the key feature of superhuman thinking to be the ability to comprehend the world independently and creatively. In contrast to the herd mentality, the Superman relies only on his own reason and experience. He is able to re-evaluate values, rejecting externally imposed norms if they contradict his inner world. However, an important question arises here. To what extent can such thinking be objective and faithfully reflect reality? After all, Nietzsche's Superman essentially rejects the centuries-old experience of mankind, enshrined in morality, religion, and culture. The scientist and philosopher Karl Popper, in his work, Open Society and Its Enemies, criticizes the idea of Superman, believing that his pride and conviction in his own rightness threaten to become sources of new despotism and violence over people. Indeed, the absolutization of the uniqueness and superiority of an individual can contradict humanistic values. For example, the ideas of equality, freedom, dignity, and rights of every human being. Nietzsche's superhuman is often dismissive of the weak and unworthy, failing to recognize their right to exist. This is a frightening manifestation of nihilism and misanthropy. But on the other hand, the absolutization of collectivism and universal equality can also lead to the loss of individuality and creativity. According to the Spanish philosopher José Ortega y Gasset, what humanity lacks are superhumans, bright, extraordinary individuals capable of leading the masses. Perhaps the ideal balance is to recognize everyone's uniqueness while respecting common rights and freedoms. So what is a superhuman? A threat to humanism or its embodiment in a single individual? Draw on the wisdom of the ages, but do not let it entangle your mind in a web. Nicholas Roerich. The question of the barriers in society to the emergence of the superhuman is highly relevant to contemporary realities. First, the superhuman is the next stage of human evolution, free from the conventions of morality and religion. However, modern society is largely based on these conventions, which creates a barrier to the emergence of the Superman. In addition, according to a number of scholars, in particular Habermas, the dominant role of scientific and technological progress actually suppresses the development of human subjectivity. Excessive technocratization of society can also hinder the transformation of man into a superhuman. One should not forget about the theory of social control developed by Monsieur Foucault. According to it, power exercises strict control and regulation of human life through various social institutions. This total control is also a significant obstacle to the formation of a superhuman personality type. Thirdly, Marcus's concept of one-dimensional man is of interest. According to it, the development of technology and mass culture actually level the personality, depriving it of independent critical thinking. Under such conditions, the process of transformation of Homo sapiens into a new species is problematic. Thus, modern society with its cultural, social, and technological peculiarities contains a lot of obstacles for the emergence of the phenomenon of Superman. And here arises a rhetorical question. Is it possible in principle within the existing social paradigm the emergence of Superman as a new evolutionary stage of human development? And is not this idea a utopia, an unrealizable dream of philosophers? The power of authority must be based on the power of truth, not violence. Mahatma Gandhi. What is the backing of a person's authority? The question posed about the nature of human authority is extremely multifaceted and interesting to speculate on. Indeed, the authority of a thinker or philosopher is largely determined by his age, life experience, and wisdom. We are more inclined to trust the judgment of a person who has passed the test of time than a young man or a child. However, there are exceptions. Let us remember at least the prodigies in science, whose discoveries amazed contemporaries. Is it possible to form a superhuman personality from childhood? or does it require a complex path of spiritual and intellectual growth? It is an interesting idea that hatred can serve as a stimulus to the formation of a Superman. Indeed, a feeling of rejection of the surrounding reality, a rebellious spirit can cause a powerful impulse to personal growth, overcoming obstacles, and self-improvement. However, there is also a downside. Excessive hatred is fraught with the destruction of a person, or even society as a whole. A fool seeks error. A wise man seeks meaning. Confucius. If an essay or any philosophical treatise is written by a child, we are likely to look for errors, inaccuracies, and manifestations of immaturity of thinking. We are unlikely to take seriously deep reasoning from an author who has no life experience and education. However, if a similar text is written by a famous philosopher, we will carefully read every word, looking for hidden meanings, allegories, references to other concepts. It is assumed that behind outwardly simple phrases, there is a deep subtext that is accessible only to a trained reader. Thus, the authority and status of the author largely predetermine our perception of the text, set expectations and attitudes when reading. This phenomenon testifies to the power of stereotypes and the influence of authority on our thinking. But doesn't this mean that sometimes we can miss a really valuable idea just because its author does not meet our expectations and perceptions? Shouldn't we sometimes turn our attention away from the author's name and focus on the very essence of what is written? Man is a mirror that distorts everything it reflects. Ernesto Sabato. Here we come to the fundamental question: how do we understand the inner world of another person, his true personality hidden behind the outer shell of body and social masks? This problem has troubled many philosophers. On the one hand, we can never fully penetrate into the consciousness of another. As Friedrich Nietzsche said, each of us is the only example of being. Each person is unique, his inner world is inimitable. On the other hand, there are certain ways of empathy that allow us to understand at least partially the other. Feeling his situation, careful observation of behavior, study of biography, analysis of creativity. Finally, just a sincere dialogue with a person about his or her experiences. In this way, we can at least come closer to understanding the inner personality of another person, that unique universe that is hidden from direct observation. And the more we penetrate into this universe, the more complete becomes not only the image of the other, but also our own idea of man as an infinite mystery of the universe. All that is great in man is the result of his own efforts. Michel Montaigne. The question of the possibility of forming a superhuman from birth and without the influence of society is very interesting. On the one hand, most philosophers, from Aristotle to existentialists, emphasize the importance of social experience and upbringing in the formation of personality. Virtually no qualities are given at birth, but are developed as the individual is socialized. In this sense, Nietzsche's Superman cannot be born ready-made. He has to go through the fire, water, and copper pipes of life's trials. However, there is another point of view, for example, Plato with his theory of innate ideas. According to it, the human soul is initially endowed with a unique potential, determined even before birth. This spiritual potential can in principle be so high that even in childhood it allows an individual to stand out among others and demonstrate the qualities of a Superman. In this case, upbringing only develops, not forms the original personality traits. Who is right in this dispute? The proponents of social constructivism or innate potential? I believe the truth is somewhere in the middle, but certainly, biologically inherited traits also play a role in shaping the unique human spirit. And maybe, somewhere out there, in the shimmering haze of quantum probabilities, there is a glimmering chance of a miracle, a superhuman by nature. The superhuman forms his own scale of values instead of blindly following conventional morality. Friedrich Nietzsche. The theme of loneliness and talking to oneself touches the deepest aspects of human existence. First, solitude provides a unique opportunity to focus on one's inner world, thoughts and experiences. As Arthur Schopenhauer wrote, solitude and reflection is what makes a man wise. In silence and solitude, new ideas, discoveries, and creations are born. Secondly, solitude allows one to know and understand oneself better. The social masks and roles we play in society often hide our true selves. Alone with yourself, you can be extremely honest and sincere. In the words of philosopher Michel Montaigne, the only subject worthy of your study is yourself. Third, solitude gives you a sense of freedom and independence from external influences and evaluations. You can fully manage your time and do what is truly important to you personally, not to others. As Henry David Thoreau said, "You are never less alone than when you are alone with yourself." As for talking to yourself, that too is a valuable experience. It allows one to articulate and clarify one's thoughts, develop reflective and critical thinking skills. Philosophical dialogues with oneself are conducted by many thinkers in search of truth. Thus, solitude and seclusion, reflection and talking to oneself are gifts that open the way to wisdom and self-knowledge. It is not without reason that Albert Camus wrote, "To be unable to be alone is to be unable to love or think." We can summarize that a reasonable dose of solitude and reflection can indeed bring a person closer to the ideal of the superhuman. But complete alienation from society is hardly productive. What do you think? Does modern man need the ability to appreciate and use solitude? Or are we turning into herd creatures, incapable of reflection in isolation from society? The true power is not those who command people, but those whose ideas command people. Johann Goethe. What is better, to understand human beings or to rule them? On the one hand, understanding human nature, motives, and behavior gives us the ability to interact with people more effectively. As the philosopher Martin Buber said, true relationships arise only through dialogue and mutual understanding. Psychologist Carl Rogers argued that empathy and unconditional positive regard help to unlock the inner potential of the individual. On the other hand, managing people can also be an effective means to achieve certain goals. Philosopher Thomas Hobbes in his treatise Leviathan described a social contract in which people voluntarily surrender some of their rights to the ruler in exchange for protection and order. Sociologist Max Weber analyzed various forms of domination and legitimate power in society. However, many thinkers have warned of the dangers of excessive social control and manipulation of mass consciousness. Philosopher Erich Fromm wrote about the flight from freedom, when people voluntarily give up independent choice for the sake of illusory security. Perhaps the best option is balance, the pursuit of mutual understanding combined with soft forms of regulation and control where necessary. As philosopher Emmanuel Mounier believed, true freedom lies in a conscious moral choice in favor of another person. Yet, what is more important in the end, understanding or governance? Believe in yourself, and you are already halfway to victory. Ralph Emerson. As the famous psychologist Viktor Frankl noted, every person should have a higher purpose worth living for. And for many people, that purpose is faith, in God, in a higher meaning, in a better future. Existentialist philosophers, particularly Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, have written about how, in the midst of the absurdity and chaos of the world, faith gives life meaning and direction. Religious teachings promise believers eternal life after death or rebirth, which is also a powerful incentive to value and preserve one's present life. However, there is also a downside. As Friedrich Nietzsche warned, faith can lead to the denial of the real world and slave morality. Fanatical devotion to utopian ideals is fraught with disappointment and even violence. History knows many such examples. Therefore, it may be wise to take a moderate position. While recognizing the positive role of faith in the lives of many people, it is important to maintain a healthy skepticism and accept the world as it is. And then faith will not be a substitute for reality, but a source of additional strength for creation, the very will to live. Love is the best teacher. Johann Goethe. Love and belief are closely related. As Erich Fromm wrote in The Art of Love, true love involves caring, responsibility, and a deep understanding of the other person. One cannot love under compulsion or for profit. Therefore, attempts to encroach on someone's love, manipulate feelings for their own interests, are doomed to failure. But if you manage to fall in love with something, awaken sincere interest and involvement, the chances of success increase significantly. The philosopher Michel de Montaigne noted that only those who are sincerely convinced of what they are saying can be truly persuasive. Charismatic leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King inspired millions with their fervent faith and commitment to ideals. Thus, in order to truly persuade others, it is important to persuade and inspire oneself first, and then this enthusiasm can be transferred to other people. He who proves too much proves nothing. Pierre Boist. Before disproving something, it is indeed wise to first prove that statement. This approach allows you to get deeper into the essence of the issue by examining it from all sides. Philosophers of science, in particular Karl Popper, formulated the principle of falsification. According to him, a scientific theory can be considered correct exactly as long as it has not been disproved. To disprove something, it is necessary to first propose a certain hypothesis or model, and then experimentally show that it does not correspond to reality. For example, the Copernican model of the solar system was proven and widely accepted only after previous geocentric ideas had been effectively disproved. The modern understanding of the structure of the atom was also formed as a result of the refutation of classical theories. In arguments and debates, this approach is also often useful. If we want to convincingly refute the opponent's opinion, it is reasonable to first analyze his argumentation in detail, showing its strengths and weaknesses, and only then move on to criticism. Thus, by proving and disproving alternately, one can move toward a deeper understanding of any issue. There are higher and lower truths, more essential and less essential. Fyodor Dostoevsky. The question of what is more important, truth or happiness, is an age-old philosophical dilemma. And indeed, it is very difficult to change the mind of a person who firmly adheres to any beliefs, especially religious ones. Let us understand the reasons why. First, faith for many people is closely linked to personal happiness and the meaning of life. As Blessed Augustine taught, human beings have an innate attraction to God, which brings joy and comfort. Therefore, believers instinctively protect their beliefs as a source of mental comfort. Second, faith is often reinforced by social ties. People surround themselves with like-minded people, and this strengthens their confidence in their own rightness, according to the social proof effect. Third, cognitive dissonance, when facts contradict a person's deep-seated beliefs, is strongly influenced. According to Leon Festinger's theory, this causes emotional discomfort, which people get rid of by rejecting or distorting inconvenient facts rather than changing their views. Thus, irrational psychological factors often outweigh rational arguments in arguments about faith and happiness. Although sometimes it is crisis and disappointment that make a person reconsider his views. God is dead, so everything is allowed. Fyodor Dostoevsky. The theme of the death of God, or the loss of the influence of religion in the modern world, is one of the fundamental problems of philosophy. Friedrich Nietzsche famously proclaimed, "God is dead." He was referring to the crisis of traditional Christian values in 19th century Europe under the influence of rationalism and the secularization of society. But the movement continues today. Modern man's thinking is increasingly shaped by science, practicality, and convenience, and technological progress. The religious worldview is losing its dominant influence on social life and morality. Existentialists, particularly Sartre and Camus, wrote of the absurdity of a world without God. Indeed, for many, the loss of faith was a tragedy. The source of the ultimate meaning of existence had disappeared. But a new freedom of independent moral choice has also emerged. Thus, the death of God was a controversial and painful but necessary step in the maturation of mankind. Having lost the childish carelessness and cozy tutelage of the father, man rose to the responsibility of an adult being in the face of the cold, boundless universe. Suffering is always a necessary condition of consciousness. Fyodor Dostoevsky. The Dream of a Funny Man, by Fyodor Dostoevsky, is one of the most enigmatic and polysemantic works of the great Russian writer. This is a philosophical parable, in which the author touches on profound questions about the nature of man, the meaning of life, and the role of suffering. The protagonist is a funny man, a cynic and egoist, radically changes his views after a mystical dream in which he gets to another planet. There he sees a paradise world, filled with beauty and harmony, where beautiful people live in love and unity. However, this paradise is then infiltrated by the sin brought by the cynic hero, his contagious example. The world of innocence quickly descends into vice and violence. The hero wakes up in despair and decides to commit suicide, but at the last moment, he realizes that he must carry the message of the paradise he has seen to the people and call them to goodness and love. This plot move allows Dostoevsky to express his views on the nature of evil in man and ways to overcome it. The writer asserts the idea that no social progress will not correct man if he does not inwardly strive for moral perfection. In the finale of the parable, Dostoevsky poses the question, is mankind capable of accepting this message of the need for inner transformation? And leaves it open, inviting the reader to seek an answer to it himself. It is absurd to think that war can teach anything but war. George Orwell. The theme of the absurdity of existence is one of the central themes in the philosophy of existentialism. Already in 1943, Albert Camus, in his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, developed the idea that human life is devoid of higher meaning and purpose. We come into this world by chance, live according to ridiculous rules imposed on us by society, and then also accidentally leave this existence. This view was shared by other thinkers, in particular Jean-Paul Sartre. In the play Flies, he shows the absurdity of people's existence in the conditions of war. The protagonist Orestes argues, "The war is fought by old men, but young men die." And indeed, what is the point in having thousands of young men die on the battlefields at the whim of the rulers? This is the ultimate absurdity. However, the absurdity of existence manifests itself not only in such extreme conditions as war, it is inherent in the everyday life of every human being. We get up in the morning, eat, work, have fun, love, and all for what? To eventually die and be forgotten? Another French philosopher, Albert Camus, believed that the only worthy human response to the absurdity of existence is rebellion, expressed in free creativity and the passionate experience of life in the here and now. Despite realizing the meaninglessness of our existence, we must continue to live, love, and fight. Such is the dilemma of the absurd, to accept the world as it is, while at the same time disagreeing with its cruelty and chaotic nature. Camus's Sisyphus keeps rolling his stone up the mountain, knowing that it will plummet downward, barely reaching the top. But in this endless labor is all the value of his miserable existence. Let us together seek answers to the challenge of the absurdity of this world. How do we confront the chaos of war and the cruelty of existence? It is not in despair and inaction, but in the unceasing struggle and fierce joy of life that is the meaning of our brief stay on this absurd yet beautiful earth. Do not do to others what you do not wish for yourself. Confucius. This famous expression, "Paradise for some can only be built if you build hell for others," poses a serious philosophical challenge to humanism. It asserts that everything in this world is relative, that the happiness and prosperity of some is necessarily achieved at the cost of the suffering of others. However, humanism as a worldview is strongly opposed to such a cruel approach. Humanists are convinced that there is no absolute paradise, nor is there an absolute hell, and even in unfavorable conditions, man is able to preserve the remnants of spirituality and compassion for his neighbors. As Viktor Frankl, a famous psychologist and thinker who lived through the horrors of concentration camps, wrote, "The freedom of choice always remains with the individual. Therefore, it is impossible to create conditions in which people would completely lose their human dignity." In addition, humanists believe that happiness is not limited to material wealth, fullness of life, commitment to the highest values. This is what is worth living for and developing humanity as a whole, and not to strive to drive some people into hell for the sake of a prosperous life for a select few. Existence precedes essence, Jean-Paul Sartre. The theme of the connection and difference between existentialism and humanism is one of the most important in modern philosophy. On the one hand, these trends are united by attention to the individual human personality, emphasis on freedom and responsibility of an individual for his/her own life choices. As Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, man is doomed to freedom. He is forced to constantly make decisions and create his own existence. We find similar ideas in Renaissance humanists such as Pico della Mirandola. However, there are also significant differences between these philosophical schools. Humanists believe that human beings are inherently good and reasonable, created in the image and likeness of God. Existentialists, on the other hand, believed that human existence is inherently absurd and meaningless. We come into a world where there is no God and no moral values. We create them ourselves, filling this void with our arbitrary choices. It is also worth noting that, unlike humanism, existentialism focuses not so much on the reason and rationality of man, but on his feelings and experiences. Existentialist philosophers, Camus, Sartre, Jaspers, wrote about such borderline states as longing, fear, despair, tossing, loneliness, and abandonment in this absurd world. Humanists have traditionally been more optimistic in their view of human nature. Thus, despite the common focus on the individual, existentialism and humanism may differ significantly in their understanding of the nature of the individual, the sources of freedom, and the place of man in the world. And of course, behind these differences are different ideas about the nature of the world itself, created according to the design of divine reason or abandoned to chance. To live is to act. Aristotle. On the one hand, we are indeed limited by a multitude of external factors, be they social conditions, political regimes, or even the laws of physics. Our lives are short, subject to suffering, and ultimately cut short by death. However, there is another point of view. Sartre, Camus, and Jaspers called for accepting this given absurdity, but at the same time, rebelling against it through free choice, creativity, and love of neighbor. Even in extreme conditions, prisons, death camps, a person can preserve inner freedom and dignity through moral choice. Thus, although we have no control over the course of world history or the laws of the universe, it is in everyone's power to choose how to react to the trials, whether to live life with dignity or to fall into despair and bitterness. Of course, there is no unambiguous solution to this dilemma. But personally, I am inclined to the existentialist position of accepting life as it is and actively rethinking it. Wisdom consists in knowing oneself. Plato. Our thoughts often seem to us to be independent entities living their own lives in our minds. They come and go, argue with each other, give us insights, and lead us astray. Sometimes we feel as if we are watching from the outside the conversation our thoughts are having. In philosophy, this phenomenon has been called stream of consciousness. According to this approach, our thinking is like a turbulent stream, carrying a variety of images, ideas, and associations. At the same time, we are not identical with our thoughts, but rather observe them, separating ourselves from this process. As for the measurement of thoughts, different interpretations are possible. Eastern philosophical teachings speak of a collective unconscious or universal mind where our thoughts are immersed. According to Carl Jung, in the depths of the psyche lies the dimension of archetypes that govern our thinking. Or perhaps Plato's world of ideas is the dimension from which our thoughts are drawn. According to Plato, our visible, sensually perceived world is but a pale shadow or reflection of another, truly real world, the world of eidos or ideas. This is the realm of eternal, unchanging entities, such as truth, goodness, beauty, justice. The earthly world is transitory and changeable, but the world of ideas exists beyond time and space. Sensual things are only partakers of ideas. They imitate them, but they are always imperfect and incomplete. For example, we see beautiful people or objects, but the idea of beauty itself is much more perfect than they are. According to Plato, the human soul originally contemplated this world of pure ideas. Incarnated in the body, the soul forgot about its true being, but seeing beautiful things in the earthly world, it feels nostalgia for the true beauty. The task of the philosopher, according to Plato, is to purify the soul from the illusions of the sensual world and to cultivate in it the ability to recall the original ideas contemplated in true reality. This is the outline of this grand ontological conception of Plato, which had a tremendous influence on all subsequent philosophy and culture. The modern social system is like a cell that can be so perfect that a newborn organism simply does not want to leave it to meet the world. Nicolas Bourriaud.